Hello and welcome to another episode of Reading Together from Sea Harp Press. I'm Eugene Luning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and just in case you're new with our YouTube channel or this particular series, Reading Together is really what it sounds like. We read together from some of our favorite books from throughout church history. Oftentimes we'll be in the Sea Harp Timeless Series editions of the book, but in this particular series, we are looking at C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, which is a HarperCollins title. This is its hardcover edition. All we do is read, pausing here and there to talk a little bit from scripture or even from my own personal experience or ponderings in these books. But welcome to my study. Thanks for being part of our crew that gathers regularly to enjoy these episodes together. Well, in our last episode, I read you the preface to this classic work. Today we're going to be diving into the first chapter of Book 1. Book 1 is entitled Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. And our first chapter of that book is entitled The Law of Human Nature. Let's begin. Everyone has heard people quarreling. Sometimes it sounds funny and sometimes it sounds merely unpleasant. But however it sounds, I believe we can learn something very important from listening to the kind of things they say. They say things like this: "How'd you like it if anyone did the same to you? That's my seat. I was there first. Leave him alone. He isn't doing you any harm. Why should you shove in first? Give me a bit of your orange. I gave you a bit of mine. Come on, you promised." People say things like that every day. Educated people as well as uneducated, and children as well as grown-ups. Now, what interests me about all these remarks is that the man who makes them is not merely saying that the other man's behavior does not happen to please him. He is appealing to some kind of standard of behavior which he expects the other man to know about. And the other man very seldom replies, "To hell with your standard." Nearly always, he tries to make out that what he has been doing does not really go against the standard, or that if it does, there is some special excuse. He pretends there is some special reason in this particular case why the person who took the seat first should not keep it, or that things were quite different when he was given the bit of orange, or that something has turned up which lets him off keeping his promise. It looks, in fact, very much as if both parties had in mind some kind of law or rule of fair play or decent behavior or morality or whatever you like to call it, about which they really agreed. And they have. If they had not, they might, of course, fight like animals, but they could not quarrel in the human sense of the word. Quarreling means trying to show that the other man is in the wrong. And there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he had some sort of agreement as to what right and wrong are. Just as there would be no sense in saying that a footballer had committed a foul unless there was some agreement about the rules of football. Now, I want to pause here. This is such an interesting way to begin a first chapter of a first book, of a book about mere or basic or real fundamental Christianity. What is Lewis doing? He's paying attention to what we might call points of friction, ways in which we feel offended, ways in which we go about our days thinking that we are at the center of our experience of all existence. And so when we come into contact with others who do not seem to be playing according to, let's say, our or the general or the natural law rules, well, it bothers us. It offends us. It feels like it's coming into our sense of personhood in a way that is not okay. You and I, no matter whether you follow Jesus for years or this is all very new to you and you're not even trying to know Jesus yet, we know how this feels. This is a deeply held, constantly experienced part of our human lives. So I think Lewis is doing something fascinating here by kind of pulling the rug out from under our high-flown notions of personhood and just saying, doesn't it feel like there's a lot of friction? Can we agree? I think so. I'll keep reading. Now, this law or rule about right and wrong used to be called the law of nature. I just referenced it as natural law. It's the same idea. Nowadays, when we talk of the laws of nature, we usually mean things like gravitation or heredity or the laws of chemistry. But when the older thinkers called the law of right and wrong the law of nature, they really meant the law of human nature. The idea was that just as all bodies are governed by the law of gravitation and organisms by biological laws, so the creature called man also had his law, with this great difference, that a body could not choose whether it obeyed the law of gravitation or not, but a man could choose either to obey the law of human nature or to disobey it. We may put this in another way. Each man is at every moment subjected to several different sets of law, but there is only one of these which he is free to disobey. As a body, he is subjected to gravitation and cannot disobey it. If you leave him unsupported in midair, he has no more choice about falling than a stone has. As an organism, he is subjected to various biological laws which he cannot disobey any more than an animal can. That is, he cannot disobey those laws which he shares with other things. But the law which is peculiar to his human nature, the law he does not share with animals or vegetables or inorganic things, is the one he can disobey if he chooses. What an interesting way to put this. I love, and I will say this many times over the course of reading this book, I love the way that Lewis strips back all of our esotericisms, the ways that we think so out there and even at times spiritually, philosophically, metaphysically. And he says, listen, if I hold out a stone, if I hold out you, you cannot disobey this law. But now we're going to be getting into a law that you can disobey, and yet a law that's even far more important than the law of gravitation. So he's causing us to sort of, to use a loaded word, deconstruct our experience of life, even the way that our physical laws impact us, so that he can get into the heart, the real truth of the matter. I'll keep reading. This law was called the law of nature because people thought that everyone knew it by nature and did not need to be taught it. They did not mean, of course, that you might not find an odd individual here and there who did not know it, just as you find a few people who are colorblind or have no ear for a tune. But taking the race as a whole, they thought that the human idea of decent behavior was obvious to everyone. And I believe they were right. If they were not, then all the things we said about the war were nonsense. What was the sense in saying the enemy were in the wrong unless right, capital R, right, is a real thing which the Nazis at bottom knew as well as we did and ought to have practiced? If they had had no notion of what we mean by right, then, though we might still have had to fight them, we could no more have blamed them for that than for the color of their hair. I know that some people say the idea of a law of nature or decent behavior known to all men is unsound because different civilizations and different ages have had quite different moralities. But this is not true. There have been differences between their moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. If anyone will take the trouble to compare the moral teaching of, say, the ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, what will really strike him will be how very like they are to each other and to our own. Some of the evidence for this I have put together in the appendix of another book called The Abolition of Man. But for our present purpose, I need only ask the reader to think what a totally different morality would mean. Think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing all the people who had been kindest to him. You might just as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 made 5. Men have differed as regards what people who you ought to be unselfish to, whether it was only your own family or your fellow countrymen or everyone. but they have always agreed that you ought not to put yourself first. Selfishness has never been admired. Men have differed as to whether you should have one wife or four, but they have always agreed that you must not simply have any woman you liked. Now, this is an interesting idea here, because you and I probably have read enough history to know that, yes, there are subtle differences between all cultures. And there have been moments, and I think Lewis is being a little bit blanket here in his statement. There have been moments in different cultures where they have absolutely gone about things that you and I would say are reprehensible. We see cultures that have a relative degree of development who still used human sacrifice. But on the whole, in these very simple ways that he's described it, things like selfishness are thought to be less than. The idea of having any partner that you want is typically going to be held as being lower on the ladder of morality. Interestingly, I think I referenced this in our last series in a different book. I myself have been enjoying a master's program of late, and just a couple of weeks ago we were reading in the works of Machiavelli. Maybe you've heard the word Machiavellian or Machiavellianism, this idea of, sort of the means justify the ends. But what I found interesting in reading that book, The Prince, if you were interested, what I find interested in reading in it is that Machiavelli essentially is looking at human nature as the foundation and saying, listen, we can agree that there is actually a thing such as human nature, and that it has its own senses of morality, what we would call, again, natural law. But what Machiavelli does is to build directly from that foundation, to say, let's take as a basis the fact that you and I have a certain level of inherent brokenness, and then let's be shrewd from there. The difference, and what we're going to be getting to throughout this book, is that Jesus is just as clear-eyed as Machiavelli was. He can see that we have fundamental brokenness, but he came to set it right at its base, at its core, at its foundation. He came not to pour new wine into old wineskins, but to make us completely new from the outside in and then from the inside out. So, as we continue our thought about natural law, I just want to keep in front of you that there are vast things to be thought about here as we think of natural law, as we think of the foundation of human nature. Enough of me. Let's get back to Lewis. But the most remarkable thing is this. Whenever you find a man who says he does not believe in a real right and wrong, both capitalized, you will find the same man going back on this a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he will be complaining, "It's not fair," before you can say Jack Robinson. A nation may say treaties don't matter, but then next minute they spoil their case by saying that the particular treaty they want to break was an unfair one. But if treaties do not matter, and if there is no such thing as right and wrong, in other words, if there is no law of nature, what is the difference between a fair treaty and an unfair one? Have they not let the cat out of the bag and shown that, whatever they say, they really know the law of nature just like anyone else? It seems then we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. People may be sometimes mistaken about them, just as people sometimes get their sums wrong, but they are not a matter of mere taste and opinion any more than the multiplication table. Now, if we are agreed about that, I go on to my next point, which is this. None of us are really keeping the law of nature. If there are any exceptions among you, I apologize to them. They had much better read some other book, for nothing I'm going to say concerns them. And now, turning to the ordinary human beings who are left, I hope you will not misunderstand what I am going to say. I am not preaching, and heaven knows I do not pretend to be better than anyone else. I am only trying to call attention to a fact. The fact that this year, or this month, or more likely this very day, we have failed to practice ourselves the kind of behavior we expect from other people. There may be all sorts of excuses for us. That time you were so unfair to the children was when you were very tired. That slightly shady business about the money, the one you have almost forgotten, came when you were very hard up. And what you promised to do for old so-and-so and have never done, well, you never would have promised if you had known how frightfully busy you were going to be. And as for your behavior to your wife or husband or sister or brother, if I knew how irritating they could be, I would not wonder at it. And who the dickens am I anyway? I am just the same. That is to say, I do not succeed in keeping the law of nature very well. And the moment anyone tells me I am not keeping it, there starts up in my mind a string of excuses as long as your arm. The question at the moment is not whether they are good excuses. The point is that they are one more proof of how deeply, whether we like it or not, we believe in the law of nature. If we do not believe in decent behavior, why should we be so anxious to make excuses for not having behaved decently? The truth is, we believe in decency so much, we feel the rule of law pressing on us so, that we cannot bear to face the fact that we are breaking it. And consequently, we try to shift the responsibility. For you notice that it is only for our bad behavior that we find all these explanations. It is only our bad temper that we put down to being tired or worried or hungry. We put our good temper down to ourselves. And friends, there's only one paragraph left in this chapter, but I want to point out here that what Lewis has done very skillfully and gently, if you noticed, is to actually just lay the foundation of the fall. The fact that you and I were built for intimate, union-like relationship with God. In the very same way that Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the day, you and I were meant to do that as well. But we didn't break some, Old Testament law when from the very beginning we broke away and turned ourselves into our own versions of God. No, there was no spiritual law in play yet. From the beginning, when we fell, as we call it, what we broke was the intimate union that was actually intended with God. Natural law is the whisper of our inner conscience, our inwardness in His direction, that says that there are right behaviors. And that right behavior is aimed in the direction of union with God. But the reason we fall short is because it is broken. Our fundamental state as human beings is in a fallen place. This is not some Augustinian concept of original sin. This is just our absolutely self-evident experience of human life. Things are not as they are meant to be. Where God is, where holiness is, we don't quite seem to belong, and it hurts us. Hence the way that Lewis points out, when we fall short with other people, we make excuses. There's a moment in Bonhoeffer in his Ethics where he says that we are struggling always to lift our eyes and meet the other man's eye. That's the truth. It's broken in every single direction. Last paragraph, and then we'll be done. These, then, are the 2 points I wanted to make. First, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. Secondly, that they do not, in fact, behave in that way. They know the law of nature, they break it. These 2 facts are the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in. Friends, what a great way for him to end this opening chapter, which, let's be honest, has a bit of a somber kind of quality. But I love the fact that he's made it so simple. There is a sense in us that there is a right way to live, and we're not living that way all the time. None of us can argue with that. It is, in fact, inarguable. And yet the beauty of what Lewis is going to do is to take us on a journey toward the one who actually entered this flesh and lived it aright. His name is Jesus, in case you're wondering, and I am so delighted that you're with me on the journey as we move in his direction through the brilliancies of C.S. Lewis. So that has been Book 1's Chapter 1, and we are in Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, a HarperCollins edition of the book. Thank you for joining me. I hope that this has given you a moment to slow down, to enjoy within this episode some deeper thoughts about the nature of our inward life. And I look forward to our next episode, the next chapter of Book 1. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.